Good evening, and welcome to a special Fire Caves After Dark, the Star Trek show that's dedicated to Star Trek Deep Space Nine. But then we also cover all other things Trek and sci-fi whenever the notion moves us, like this one did. So I hope you all are ready to strap in as we talk about the one of the better sci-fi movies of the latter half of the '90s, Star Trek First Contact. Okay, so we're going to get right into it. Just to explain why we're doing this After Dark real quick, it's because David is a first time viewer of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and we've been following the timeline as best we can when it comes to not just watching the episodes, but also the movies and so forth. And now it was finally time. He was finally able to watch Star Trek First Contact. So we're going to review the movie, get his impressions, and of course, you're going to get to listen to me fanboy over a movie that I've seen countless number of times over the intervening 20, 30 years since it came out. So
Right.
now, did you
Yeah.
think that we should give a recap of this movie, or should we just jump right in? Because it is a movie and it's different, and
We can hit the highlights. I mean, I feel it's a movie
sure.
that it pretty easily hits highlights. I guess I'll do it because I just watched it.
Yeah, since you're the newbie, what did you
Yeah.
remember? What are your
So,
highlights?
for those, you have to basically watch TNG in order to really understand this film at all. Picard has a nightmare of when he was assimilated by the Borg at the end of season 3 of TNG, when he became Locutus of Borg for a brief time. But he wakes up, he's hearing Borg voices, and he gets notified that the Borg are invading. There's Deep Space Five is saying there's a Borg cube on the way, but Starfleet Command doesn't want Picard involved because they feel he's too emotional on the subject. So they send the new Enterprise E, which looks very different from the old D, to go to the neutral zone and basically make sure the Romulans don't do anything fancy while they're dealing with the Borg. But they tune in to listen in how the battle goes. They hear the battle's going badly, so Picard and the crew agree to break from their orders and go help with the Borg invasion. They get there in time to see that once again the Borg are routing the Enterprise. I'm sorry, the Federation starships, and so Picard takes control of the fleet. Says aim at this particular section of the Borg cube, even though it doesn't seem to be all that important. They all aim at that section and are able to destroy the Borg cube. But before it's destroyed, a sphere is launched from the Borg cube and creates a temporary time warp to the past, and the Enterprise gets caught up in it. Before the Enterprise jumps out, Worf it was there with the Defiant. The Defiant is badly damaged, so they bring Worf and the rest of his crew that's still alive aboard. They tell him that the Defiant is still salvageable. It's just floating out there. So Worf is with our TNG crew for their next adventure. They go through this wormhole to the past, where they are there the day before Earth makes first contact. In particular, the day before they make the first attempt at a warp nacelle test by the character Zephram Cochrane.
Hmm.
And they get there just in time to basically realize the Borg are trying to change history to assimilate Earth before they are able to become a star-faring species. The next day is when they're supposed to do the test. That will notify the Vulcans of the nature of Earth being ready to join the advanced species of the galaxy, and first contact will be made. So if they can't make sure that the uh, test goes through, then history will be altered dramatically, and the Borg have a very high chance of assimilating Earth way in the past, back during the 21st century. This is like 2063, I believe, the year they're in. Um, so they beam down to the planet. They find uh, Zachrin. No, I'm sorry, I'm saying it wrong.
Zephram Cochrane.
Ephraim Cochrane. They find him, and the long story short with him is that he's a man who doesn't realize his importance to history. He's a drunk. He is not the most upstanding kind of individual. When Geordi and the others start kind of fanboying over who he is and his history, he runs away for a time. He doesn't want to be this mythical historical figure that everyone's saying he becomes. And so for a time, he runs away from his job of leading and piloting this vessel that's going to be the first warp core test. But eventually, Geordi, Riker, Troy convince him to go ahead and go through with it. So Geordi, Riker, and Troy are all on Earth, helping him do his business, getting the warp nacelles working. However, the main plot is happening back on the Enterprise. Turns out, before the sphere was destroyed by the Enterprise, following it through the wormhole, the Borg were able to uh, transport some Borgs to the Enterprise, and they go to engineering and start assimilating crew members and taking over the ship. Uh, the Borg is basically taking over the ship in order to send a message to deep space where the Borg are in the Delta Quadrant to alert them to the presence of Earth and to come attack it now. That's going to be the definitive moment where the Borg come to Earth, assimilate it well before the 24th century. Um, while trying to attack the Borg on the ship, Data is captured, and there's the revelation that the Borg have a queen, the Borg Queen. She is someone who is more personal in her relationship with people that she talks with. And later we find out that she actually was there when Picard was assimilated. But she tells Data that she can do more to make him human than ever before. She can actually give him skin, for example. Now, he had locked the main ship computer out from the Borg's control. So he knows that they're going to try and convince him to give control of the ship completely over to the Borg, but he refuses. So they basically, instead of torturing Data, they're actually using incentives to get Data to join them.
The old carrot instead of the stick.
Exactly, including some references to, hey, you want to learn how sex is? Like, I haven't, it's been 8 years since Data's had sex, but the Borg Queen's willing to, join him.
Give him an old roll in the hay for old time's sake.
Yeah,
Now that he's got some skin in the game, as it were.
literally, yeah. So during this time, Picard, Worf, Worf,
Lieutenant
Crusher,
Hawk.
Lieutenant Hawk, who he's the new guy. He's the one who's piloting the ship in most scenes. But who's the other crew member? It's Crusher, Picard, Worf, and Data. Oh, Data, of course, because Data's been captured. They're all on the ship, and they're having to fight off the Borg with various crew members. And again, they're losing the battle. The Borg are expanding. They don't like fully take over the ship. Like again, the Borg don't consider the humans a threat, so the humans can go in amongst the Borg sometimes, and the Borg will ignore them. But anytime they try and stop the Borg from doing something, the Borg attack. Now, when they were on Earth earlier, getting the whole warp situation figured out, they did bring aboard a human woman from the past to the ship to heal her, but because of the Borg invasion, they've had to tell her what's going on. So when Picard says we're going to defeat the Borg, we're not going to scuttle the Enterprise in an attempt to stop the Borg from doing their job, he confronts Worf. Worf and he get into a very heated conversation. Worf says we need to scuttle the ship in order to stop the Borg from doing what they're going to do. We need to take our loss and move on. Picard emotionally says, no, I'm not going to let the Enterprise be lost. Again, he just lost the Enterprise D in the last film. He's not going to lose the Enterprise E. He's just got to know her. But the human woman tells him, hey, you need to do it. And there's a conversation they have about Ahab and the whale and stuff like that. Moby Dick. Sorry, yes, Moby Dick. And so Picard agrees that yes, actually they do need to scuttle the ship. This is not if that's the best way to destroy the Borg, that's what they need to do. However, he's going to go down with the ship and try and save Data. So he goes to try and save Data. Data has been given more human skin on his face in particular, and he seems to have been assimilated. So Picard says to the Borg Queen, let Data escape. Take me instead. I will be the equal to you amongst humans. So you wanted me to give myself willingly when you first tried to assimilate me. I will go willingly this time. Uh, Data seems to have been assimilated and on the Borg side. So he undoes the
Mhm.
lockout, for example, and he undoes the self destruct sequence, and he fires some torpedoes at the ship where the warp test is being produced. However, the torpedoes narrowly miss, revealing that Data is actually not been compromised. He's actually still on Picard and the Enterprise crew's side, and he hits a coolant system that will vaporize and destroy all biological life that it touches. So Picard narrowly escapes. All of the Borg drones are killed, including, again, previous members of the crew who've been assimilated, and the Borg Queen is also killed. So they're able to save the Enterprise. They are able to confirm the warp test, and the Vulcans do. I'm sorry, the Vulcans do arrive, and the Enterprise crew, having seen how the Borg traveled through space and time with their time travel, recreate that same event and travel back to the future. I think I hit all the big
That
things.
is essentially it. You
Yeah,
did.
I mean, I
You did.
just watched it today, so
Yeah,
yeah,
we're gonna
pretty
get
fresh.
into it. Don't get me wrong. We're gonna get into it. But yes, you definitely hit the high points there that we needed. Um, so many great things in this movie that later Trek would then use for just other aspects of world building, lore building, and other shows. And so that's what I want to actually start with first because you don't know it. And the chances of you watching all of it to realize where all of that comes from is remote. I mean, you could do it, but it would be a while.
Take a while.
Yeah. So, like for example, the first one that we're going to talk about is the ending. So they blow up the sphere,
Hmm.
and as you can imagine, whenever you blow up a ship, there's going to be debris, and this
Hmm.
debris will rain down wherever it's in orbit. So now it's in a decaying orbit, and then it falls into the planet and so forth and gets covered up. So this movie is set about what did they say this was? The latter half. So it's the latter half of the
63.
21st century.
Yeah, 2063, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly. Yeah.
Yeah. So 2063, which is an important date we're going to also get back to, April 4th, 2063.
Hmm.
Um but anyway, so when the debris falls to the earth, it turns out that a lot of this debris lands in Antarctica, where it's immediately buried in snow and then more and more and more snow over the next 100 years, right? So now
Mm.
let's move us forward 100 years now into the 22nd century, the latter half of the 22nd century. And we have Captain Archer and company on the very first ship to be named Enterprise in the show of the same name, Star Trek Enterprise.
Mhm.
And there is an episode where an Antarctic expedition team uncovers this mysterious spherical wreckage in
Mm.
the polar ice caps in Antarctica, which, if you ask me, the most stunning thing about that episode was that there were still polar ice caps in the 22nd century, but we're not going to talk about global warming right now. Um, but anyway, they find these spherical pieces and they're trying to put it together and figure out what all this is and speculate where it came from. They can tell it's alien, but we're not really sure who. And then all of a sudden, they uncover a couple of frozen bodies in the ice. And
Mm.
they got all these weird cybernetic implants all over them. And as far as I can tell, they've been dead and frozen in the ice for 100 years. So they
Yeah.
bring them inside and they lay them on a slab and they're tinkering away with them and everything else. And then as the bodies warm up, certain things start to tick back
Comes back
on.
to life. Yep.
And then before you know it, we've got two robots running around as they were calling them at first until they take over that expedition team. They hijack a shuttle, they take off, they wreak havoc elsewhere, they kill a bunch of people in other places. But thankfully, because they were having to upgrade centuries old technology from their perspective, because they're from the 24th century and it's the 22nd century, they're
Mhm.
not able to fully affect a takeover and escape, and the Enterprise of the day is able to destroy them. That is, like the first time that we have an instance of this movie being used in later Trek. Um,
Great.
Now, the character of Zephram Cochrane makes the appearance in two other Treks. The first one being the original series, where in the original series storyline, we don't know what happened to Zephram Cochrane. He was a very famous warp field theorist and whatever else. He is the heralded as the creator of warp drive.
Hmm.
Um, and according to the lore of the next generation, or not the next generation, but the original series, he was testing an experimental new warp drive when he went missing. And as
Mm,
far as anybody knew, he had just died somewhere in deep space.
right.
And then he pops up later on another planet where it turns out he did crash land, and this alien being has been taking care of him all of this time, and that's why he's still alive, because that's the original series is set in the 23rd century.
Right.
So he launched in the middle or the latter half of the 21st century, and somehow he's still being kept alive in the 23rd century, living out his life on an alien planet.
Gotcha.
In Star Trek Lower Decks, he makes an appearance as a hologram where they're in Bozeman, Montana, in celebration of first contact with Vulcans and his importance and everything else. They have created a whole theme park around first contact, and you can take
Theme park.
yes,
Okay.
and you can take the Phoenix as a an attraction, as a ride, kind of like we would have a Ferris wheel or a
Right.
roller coaster, right? You
Hmm.
can ride in the Phoenix with a holographic version of Zephyr Cochrane and play his terrible music, and it will shoot you to the moon and back. And so that's
Wow.
the next time that we see him.
Gotcha.
Now, Zephyr Cochrane is played in this movie by James Cromwell, great
Hmm.
actor,
Yep.
who also has a nice storied Trek lineage here. He has showed up multiple times across various shows. He was in Next Generation. He was in Deep Space Nine a few times. Obviously, we see him here. Yeah, James Cromwell is a pretty, and he's a pretty solid actor. If you ever get the chance to just like Google him at all, you'll
Uh-huh.
notice that he's in a lot of stuff, and you've probably seen him in movies and maybe didn't know who he was. But he's one of those
Mm.
people that we were talking about last night. A very distinctive voice. He also has a very distinctive height. He's quite tall,
Yes.
and so yeah, he's a very noticeable individual.
Yeah. He's been in Deep Space Nine, apparently.
Yes,
I
he was in
forget which
Deep
episode
Space
that
Nine.
was.
The episode Starship Down, when they are trying to negotiate with the Karma, with the Ferengi, and Quark is the intermediary, and the Dominion is snooping around, and they go into that
Oh,
gaseous
yes.
anomaly, and
Yeah,
Cisco
he
gets
was
blown up and the head injury. He's
yeah, he
trapped
was in
below
under
decks
heavy
with Quarks.
makeup. He had heavy
Yes,
makeup on, but I recognized
yes,
his voice. Yeah, that's
yes,
right.
that's right. Now, another interesting point for this movie is that this movie is also where the timelines diverge for the mirror universe. So if you've ever wanted to
Ah.
figure that out, this is the point. So the point is that as we see in this movie, um, Zefram Cochrane doesn't believe Riker and company when they tell him about them being time travelers from the future and they've come back in time to stop the Borg from assimilating everything else, right? They tell him their full story. No cover stories. No, we're going to blank your mind later on. They just lay it all out for the guy because whatever, screw
Well,
timelines.
to
And
be fair, Troy says that she tried telling him, but he didn't believe their cover story.
well, that just
But at
means
that
that
point,
Troy is a very, very terrible liar.
she's
So,
also a drunk by that. She's
yeah,
drunk and she can't control herself anymore at that point. So,
yeah.
which is a hilarious scene. But keep going.
So the point is that where the timelines diverge is that after our heroes leave and go back to the future, Zefram Cochrane has to make a choice. He can either double down and be like fearful of all aliens and we're not going to do this because there's obviously terrible ones up there trying to kill us, or we can embrace this future, this bold new world that these future people told me about.
Right.
And that's where it divulges. So, or diverges. So in our universe, or yeah, in the Prime universe, he greets the
Embraces.
Vulcans
Yeah.
warmly. He embraces them. He shakes their hand, as we see in the movie. He shakes their hand, and this begins the ushering in of peace. In the Mirror universe, when the Vulcan steps down and offers his hand, he pulls out a gun and he shoots him.
Ah.
And so then it starts this fear mongering of all aliens and this war mentality, this militaristic mentality. We must have better weapons. We must be better prepared. We must, go to the stars with a vengeance, not with idealism and exploration in mind.
Gotcha.
So that is the split. So if you ever wondered where the roads truly diverged, according to Star Trek, this is it. Now
Interesting.
you can watch a bunch of different episodes, and there's other times where you could think of no, it's split here, but when it comes to the canon reference, this is the moment that is used.
Interesting. Okay.
All right. So that's pretty much all the Trek lore we're going to go into for right now. I'm sure there's going to be other things that pop up as we talk about this movie, not
Mhm.
episode, movie. Um, but now that we've gotten that out of the way, of course, I want to ask you, like, what did you think of this movie? This is again, we've already seen all the Next Generation stuff. You've already watched Generations. You're firmly in the camp of Deep Space Nine now. We're season 5, and here you
Mhm.
go back into with our TNG crew. So, what did you think of this movie?
So I'll start with with just simply put, while James Cromwell is a great actor, all the stuff with his character of Cochrane on Earth is unfortunately just a distraction from the much more interesting Borg storyline up on the Enterprise. Every time we go down to Earth to find out what's happening down there, it's Geordi's fixing the thing, and Riker is they're chasing him and they stun him, and he gets he falls into a stream and gets Cochrane falls into a stream and gets wet, and Troy gets
He
drunk
doesn't
trying.
fall into a stream. He gets shot and he rolls down a
Well,
mountain
that's what I
or
mean.
rolls
He
down the
falls into
cliff.
a stream because he got shot. Yeah, I'm being really clear. Troy gets drunk, which is a funny scene. Um, and it's we also get what's Reg, the
Red
funny.
Barkley,
Yeah,
Mr. Broccoli
yeah,
is back.
he shows up for a brief moment as way too enthusiastic to meet Cromwell. He's probably the one who kind of pushes or not Cromwell, um, uh, Cochrane over the
Cochrane.
edge with his enthusiasm. Though it's Geordi saying, "Yeah, you have like a 20-meter tall statue right where you're standing in the future. I went to the school named after you." It's a lot. I think it's a funny reaction for him to be all like run away from all this. But we know that he's a guy who's very. I mean, he loves his alcohol. He's always got something going. Um,
Yeah.
but then also like the fact that Jordy and Riker are the ones who make the trip with him. Like if there were 3 seats on this ship to start, who are the 2 people that were supposed to have gone on this voyage that didn't because Riker and Jordy kind of
So
butted in?
so the lore would have been that it was supposed to be Lily, who is currently up on the Enterprise with Picard,
Right.
and then
Yes.
some other person who most likely died
In
when
the
the
attack, the
Borg were
Borg
doing their
attack.
attack. So that's
Fair
why there's
enough.
2 vacant
That's
seats.
a reasonable explanation for what it should have been. Um,
Mhm.
and I'm not saying that that means that okay, fine. I'm just pointing out that it feels like Riker and Geordi kind of like don't have anything else to do in this movie. So hey, we'll
Mm.
have them join the maiden voyage. Now, of course, Riker, played by Jonathan Frakes was directing, so it makes sense for him to want to take a step back. He's directing the movie overall. Why try and act and direct at the same time? Uh, LeVar Burton, who plays Geordi, I don't know that he directed anything in this movie, but we know he has directed episodes. So I imagine he might
Yeah.
have been great as like a second
And
person to help out. But
he's directed a lot of episodes. I know that Jonathan Frakes had directed a few episodes up to this point, but he was the first one, as far as I understand it anyway, he was the first one to really get a shot at the major motion picture doing that. And it actually became like just like a great launching point for him because he became kind of their go-to person
right.
for filming Trek afterwards. In fact, no one has filmed nearly as much Star Trek as Jonathan Frakes.
Hmm.
I mean, every show since Next Generation, he's directed several episodes of,
Yeah.
and with I think Discovery being the show that he's done the most directing of,
Right.
if I'm not mistaken.
Which
But
makes sense. Yeah.
yeah, and then, it's even to the point where the movies, as because obviously there are more Next Generation movies coming up for you, by the way, which you can now watch at any time because they don't really have any bearing on the rest of Deep Space Nine, so you can
Okay.
watch those whenever you want. But there are the ones that were clearly directed by Jonathan Frakes, and then there's the ones that weren't, and you can tell.
Yeah.
So, in fact, there's one in particular I'm thinking of that everybody is just like, it's awful, and it's because the director didn't know anything about Star Trek, didn't really want to have anything to do with Star Trek, didn't really like Star Trek, and even
Ah.
though there was a campaign to have Jonathan Frakes direct the movie, they decided to go with this other guy, and we get this steaming pile of movie. So
So I'm just gonna go ahead and ask which one that is, because just for fun, we can talk about it real fast. Because I think is that the one where they have I'm trying to think, because I know
I'll tell you. I'll just tell
Nemesis.
you.
It's Nemesis,
Yes,
right? Yeah.
it's Nemesis. It's the last one featuring the Next Generation cast, and it's pretty much widely accepted that it's the movie that killed further movie projects in general. It
Right.
performed so poorly. It was just so poorly received. And
Yeah.
even the acting jobs of all of our main cast, plus a very young Tom Hardy,
Yeah.
couldn't save the terrible directing, writing, production
Right.
of this film.
Okay.
So
So knowing that that one is two ahead, there's two movies. That would be the sec of the next movies. That's two away. And I know I've heard that Star Trek, it's like every other film, like the odd ones or the good ones or the bad ones. I
yeah,
forget.
something like that. It's like yeah, the no, the even ones are the good ones. I think that's supposed to be how that goes.
Okay.
Well, I'll have to go back and take a look at that because because it really just kind of depends on what you're in the mood for. Like
Right.
Star Trek 4 is the one with the whales, as everybody calls it, and depending on who you talk to, that movie's a lot of fun, and then to other people,
Right.
it's awful. So
Gotcha.
yeah, it just kind of depends on where you are. Whereas Star
Well,
Trek
because you
6
love the
is
Wrath of
great,
Khan, so yeah.
and that's number 2.
Right.
And
Okay.
then, number 3 is a much more somber movie. So I can understand people saying that it's not necessarily their favorite. Then number 4 kind of
Right.
gets the crew back together. Number 5, that's a Shatner flick all day long, and it's got some great elements, but it's not that great. And then number 6 is nice. It's a nice finish for them. Then of course
Right.
you've got Generations next after that, so that'd be number 7. Eh, you know, this is the 8th film. It's great. Then the next one would be Insurrection.
Yeah. Hmm.
And that's not bad. It's got F. Murray Abraham in it. Not a bad film. It gets a
Okay.
little soft in some places, but it's not bad. And then after that, then comes Nemesis. And Nemesis is just like, ugh, thank God we made it to 10 because that's it.
Gotcha. I
And
still
there
want to
hasn't,
watch Nemesis simply to see Tom Hardy, because, as you
mhm.
said, he's popular now, but I know that that did kind of
That was very early on. That was very early on in his
career.
getting
Yeah.
into Hollywood experience.
Right.
And then every movie that we've had of Star Trek after that has been a reboot. It's been the reboot cast of
Yeah.
the original series,
Right.
which I was thrilled when the first one came out. Don't get me wrong, I did see it several times, but
Right.
now I'm just like I would much rather y'all move on. Like I would love it if they would just do an all new movie called Star Trek and it had a completely different cast, no familiar names whatsoever. We're just starting you off brand new
Right.
with this group and
Right.
go. I'd
Right.
also like to see a D Space Nine movie, but that's neither here nor there. So
While we're talking about cast members, I'm reading here on Wikipedia that apparently they didn't ask Whoopi Goldberg to come back as Guinan, which, if we remember, Guinan has a history with the Borg, so her
mhm,
absence actually is kind of a thing. According to Wikipedia, here she didn't like get called up at all. Like, they just
didn't do
didn't
it.
even, yeah, didn't even say, "Hey, we're thinking about doing this movie. You want to be here?" She's just like, no one even called her, which is too bad. I mean, I don't know how Guinan would have played in with the story, but okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly I wouldn't be surprised at all if that's one of those situations where she's too expensive and so they couldn't justify considering that your A story is Picard still dealing with his trauma from being assimilated and your B story is this first contact situation. Where would you put Guinan in that?
Right.
And trying to figure out a way that would not only work her character in, but also justify her character being there and justify the price that it would
Right,
require to get Whoopi to do the to
right.
reprise that role.
And
Probably all those factors together.
to be fair, this
Yeah.
is a whole new ship. It's still the Enterprise, but it's a
Yeah.
whole new Enterprise ship. Makes sense that cast or the crew of the ship has changed pretty drastically, even
Yeah.
if our main cast is the same. I mean, heck, even Worf isn't on the
Worf
Enterprise
isn't on
anymore.
the Enterprise anymore, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, and so if you want to go out of universe, I feel like there were a lot of things probably here they were ticking off that were just eating into expenses. They had to create an all new massive model of the Enterprise to use for this movie. There's new uniforms, new sets,
Hmm.
new everything. Plus, they're filming on location.
Hmm.
There's all the stuff that's going on here, and then you've got, again, James Cromwell. He's a pretty big grab for them as well for a Star Trek production.
Right.
Alfred Woodward, who's playing Lily Sloan in this movie, she's also a pretty big grab for them. You've seen her in a lot of things
Yeah.
too. She was in the one that comes to my mind right now. She's in one of the Avengers movies
Yeah.
briefly.
She had a
So
brief line, but she actually had more to do in the was it the Jessica Jones show? Like the she
I think
was
I think that's right. I think she either Jessica Jones
or Luke
or
Cage actually. No,
Luke
it was the Luke
Cage.
Cage show.
Yeah.
That's right, the Luke Cage show. She was playing two different characters in the Marvel universe, but the idea is the TV show was in the Marvel universe, but it never had quite the direct tie-ins as other things did. But anyway, yes, I recognized her when she showed up. Like I knew her face, but I couldn't remember where I'd seen her from, and so I
Mhm.
looked her up later. So she's there, and then Neil McDonough plays Hawk, who is the new
Young Ensign
helmsman.
Lieutenant Hawk, I forget.
Yeah,
He's the helmsman who eventually gets assimilated and then
yeah.
stomps on Picard's faceplate
During
when
the
they're
one
on
scene
the
I didn't
zero
really
G walk.
detail was Worf, Picard, and Hawk go out. Worf, Picard, and Hawk go out on the outside of the Enterprise to stop a bunch of Borgs from completing their like radar dish they're going to use to send their
Yeah,
message to
the
the Delta Quadrant.
interplexing beacon to the
There
Delta
you go.
Quadrant.
And
Yes.
during that, they have to each go to one of three terminals to manually override. And Worf gets into a fight with one of his
The
blades, but
Mek'leth, the
yeah,
Klingon Mek'leth, which he has somehow managed to slip in between the pack
it's a
and
great.
and also able to whip it out and not rip his Enviro suit
Yeah,
at all. Comes out clean
yeah,
and is just hacking away at these Borg,
yeah,
while Picard and Hawk fight it out on the other side, and
yeah,
then they, they survive, of course, and he blows
yeah.
up the
Well,
disc
Hawk gets
with a
assimilated, but
yeah.
yeah, Hawk is looking down at what he's doing too long, and he gets grabbed overboard. And Picard has a fun moment where he turns off his mag boots and jumps and
Floats
goes to where
across.
Hawk was and
Yeah.
finishes Hawk's
See,
job. And then Hawk
so
comes
many
out,
special
and
effects.
yeah,
So many
it was
special
great.
effects for this
The
movie.
best special effect was when I think it was Hawk shot one of the Borg right at the beginning of the fight, and his body like zero gravity floats and bounces off. It was great. It was well done.
And then
I
he's
mean, it
just
really,
Borg tumbling in space,
yeah, it was
you
fun.
know.
It was like, yeah, they're really trying to make sure this looks real. And this is
Work.
like the first time I remember them ever putting on any sort of exosuit. I mean, Picard says to Worf, "Do you remember your zero combat training?" And Worf says, "Yeah, it made me sick." Fun little moment. And then when Worf gets attacked, or he attacks the guy, the Borg comes at him and he cuts him up. But the Borg, as he's dying, rips a hole in
Nicks
his
his
knee,
nicks his suit, yeah, gets a
and
little knee damage.
and so he takes the dude's arm with the wire hanging off of it, uses that as basically like a
What a
tourniquet, not for his
what a
leg, as
trophy.
his,
What a
yeah,
trophy. Oh, you ripped my suit? Give me your arm. I'm just
yeah,
gonna take that and tie that around here. That cord that I just hacked off of you, give
yeah.
me that.
It's
And
funny too
that's good
because
enough
when
to
he
seal
cuts
me
the
up.
arm off the Borg character, the arm goes, but like the wire was still attached. So like the
It's just
The
dangling
cinemat
there in space.
Yeah, but the cinematography made sure you noticed there was this wire. So when you come back to Worf like 60 seconds later and he's got it tied around, you know exactly where it came from. And
Uh-huh.
there's this hand just limp there.
Just
It's
hanging
hilarious.
hanging about chest high
Yeah,
next to Worf.
yeah.
And then Worf gives the classic, late 90s action guy line, assimilate this,
Yeah, it's a
and then
great line.
blows
It's
the
so
thing up.
true. That's so yeah. Oh, it's a great 90s line. You're
Uh,
right.
that line
Assimilate
couldn't have
this.
been delivered better if it came out of Arnold Schwarzenegger.
That's so
That
true.
just
Oh,
that's
yeah.
it.
Yeah, it's true.
They
Um,
were definitely having their hero moments
yeah,
in this episode.
yeah. And the reason I mentioned that like Jordy and Riker are not there is because when initially it's Picard who goes down to the planet, and then he calls Riker down, and then he goes back up, and so Riker's down on the planet. But like having Riker and Jordy not up on the station, like Jordy in particular, to not help out with some of the things that are happening, is kind of a bummer. And just the sense that like he's our engineering guy.
Well, so if
Um,
you remember, the reason that they called Geordi down was because they thought they had killed the Borg, and
right,
then when they went down and they found Zephram's ship, the Phoenix, it was damaged from the
true,
attack. So he
right,
called down the engineering team to get it fixed as quickly as possible. He
yes,
says, "We've got 48 hours to get this done," and
right,
so that's why Geordi goes down.
right,
Then later on, he switches places with Riker because he has more experience dealing with the Borg. He recognizes that the Borg are still somewhere,
right,
but the ground team still needs leadership. So
right,
he trades places with Riker so that he can deal with the Borg problem on the Enterprise,
right,
and
right,
Riker
right.
can oversee what's going on down on the ground. That's why they're there.
Yeah, I'm not saying I don't understand why. I'm just saying I'm sorry their characters were missed during the more again the
The
scenes on
action,
Earth.
the
Yeah,
fighting
the
scenes.
action is up top.
Yeah,
So let me put it this way: while I was reading about the making of this movie, apparently they were talking about what to do for the movie, and they talked about having a Borg being the enemy, and then someone else wanted to do a time travel story. So like, let's do both. Boom, and fine. But the way they chose to tell the story meant that Jordy and Riker and Troy were left out of the main action. And
yeah.
it just is what it is. I'm just saying that it'd been nice to have all seven of our main crew members
Oh, I
having to
see what you're
work it
saying.
out
I see
all on
what
the
you're
same
saying. Yeah.
task. If they had just focused on the Borg element, like I don't know how the Enterprise. Let's say the Enterprise somehow got the Borg jumped on there, and then they forced the ship to like jump way out into space. So that's why the Enterprise is isolated from everyone else. It's not that they're in the past. Let's say they're way deep. They're like heading toward the Delta Quadrant the whole time. They're in warp the whole time, and they can't get out
They're
of
in
warp
like
or something.
they're in like super high velocity warp, and they've got to stop the ship before it crosses the threshold to the Delta Quadrant or
Yeah,
whatever.
something like that. I honestly would have preferred that storyline, simply because again, it would have kept our main crew together. And as I've said multiple times, time travel stories for me, I always have like a sensitivity to how they tell the story, and so
Mhm.
it's fun that they, as you described earlier, that they keep the elements of like, yeah, the sphere fell to Earth, and then in an episode from a show that's not even, it's like almost 10 years away, they remember that detail and make use of it. Um,
Yeah.
but the idea of changing history is always like, oh, I mean, now that the Enterprise can just warp to the past whenever they want because they remember how the Borg did it, I'm like, no, it's another instance of like, oh, hey, we
Well,
figured out time travel and we're never going to use
well,
it
time
again.
Well, that's the beauty of time travel in Star Trek. So there's actually a lot of different ways you can do time travel forward or back, depending
Yeah,
on what show you're on. Probably the most famous one, which if you go and watch the movie, this is the one that they use. You can, if you gain enough speed, you can slingshot your ship around the sun and it will put you into time warp and send you forward or back in time as long as you get the calculation right to do whichever one it is that you want.
right,
That's how that whole movie works. It's not the first time they've done it. The original series crew, because the reason they do it in that movie is because they know that it works because they did it before on the show.
right,
Then there's always the space ver- vortex vertice, something or another you can find that will also send you back in time. There's various aliens that can just snap their fingers and send you wherever they want.
right,
There's just all these little tips and tricks that they use in Trek to affect time travel. Heck,
right.
even on Deep Space Nine, find yourself the right orb, it'll send you wherever you want. you know. So
Yeah.
time travel is not a definitely not a straight arrow. You can do it
Right.
any which way that you want.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, Star Trek, they love to do it.
They
They
do.
definitely love to, and they love to come up with new ways to do it. There's
Right.
never a concrete, this is the definitive way to do it. It's
Right.
always every time time travel comes up, it's through some new mechanism we've never considered or heard of before
That is
getting it
true.
done.
And I certainly would not say that First Contact is somehow wrong to do it. It's a trope at this point. Heck,
Mm.
Deep Space Nine did like two time travel stories back to back, like just this season. So like,
Oh, and we're not done.
oh,
We're not
I know
done.
we're not. So like, all right, it's a thing. It happens. They kind of change the rules as they go. In fact, at this point, I'm more interested in having those agents from the time travel agency, whatever they were called, come around and just question
The
everybody
temporal,
every
yeah.
time. Yeah, like I would have loved if this episode had ended with the two of them like knocking on Picard's door or something, hey Picard, yeah.
So this is one of those Easter eggs we get to talk about. Because if you remember in that episode when those two agents showed up, the guy was like, and we ran into the Enterprise. He's like, which Enterprise? There have been five. And the guy corrects him and says, six.
Yep.
This is it. The
Yeah.
Enterprise E.
Yeah.
So with that, I think it's a nice little segue.
There you go.
Let's talk about the USS Enterprise E.
Hmm.
Brand new design, whole
Hmm.
new concept, whole new
Hmm.
team designing, not just the exterior, but the interior, the look of the bridge,
Yeah,
the
very different.
corridors, all of the engineering section. Sick bay gets an upgrade. We're going to talk enterprise and upgrades because there are a lot that we see in this episode. Again, episode, a lot that we see in this movie,
Yeah.
and I think they all deserve a little bit of time. So, yes, let's first start with the Enterprise E. What did you think of that big, bold, beautiful ship? I'm not
Yeah.
partial at all. Not at all. But what did you think?
Well, it certainly looks more militaristic. It's got a darker,
Yes.
more streamlined look. The bridge is more like the previous bridge of the D was bright and minimal,
And open.
very open, minimal seating. But a lot of people were usually in there, especially in the back, like behind the chairs. Like there's a bunch of people at the various sensors doing this and that, and it was very open to like running scientific experiments. To we got a military situation, we need to fight it out. But this one definitely seems more streamlined, outside and inside, and
Mhm.
so it's kind of sexier in that sense. But I definitely feel that nostalgia for the old design. The old one felt like this one feels again just more militaristic, so it kind of feels like
Mhm.
it loses some of that idea that it's primarily a diplomacy ship. It's a ship that primarily is there on peaceful missions as opposed to militaristic ones. And the older ship, the previous version, definitely felt more stately, more elegant in its being open and kind of bright. This one again being more dark and sleek. Um, so, are you saying you like this one more?
So yes, I do like this one more, as it is it's just like what you said. It's a more streamlined, much more powerful design. This ship, to me, is what you would want on a mission of deep space exploration. Now, the reason that we are given for the size and the grandeur of the Galaxy class was the fact that it was supposed to be that very regal, stately thing, but it was also about taking people to colonize new planets. So
Right,
that's why there was so much extra space for storage and for people, for
right.
personnel.
Hmm.
And, it was designed so that when you did have guests that came on board, they were impressed with the fact that it was such an open and more communal feel to the
Right.
ship. And if
Mhm.
you remember several times when you're watching Next Generation, when they're walking through the ship, how many areas did you see that were set up where you could just kind of like just sit like you were walking through the park and there'd be like a random, bench, whatever set up where you could be
Mhm.
sitting, or they had how many gymnasiums and arboretums and observation decks and lounges and all kinds of stuff that was all designed towards comfort and
Right.
ease.
Mhm.
Whereas this ship is much more streamlined. The Galaxy class was a ship that had 42 decks. As we find out here, this ship has 24 decks.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
definitely.
Definitely more compact, going along with that streamlined look, but it's also way more powerful. All new upgraded technology, state of the art weapons. We see quantum they're quantum torpedoes, not quantum photon torpedoes. For quantum torpedoes, they've got different types of shields. They've got way more phaser arrays. That thing was firing like crazy when it was going around the cube in the first part of the movie.
Uh-huh.
Laying out some devastating damage. Again, to me, that says like you still have people who are trained for diplomacy and politicking and all that other kind of stuff on the
Right.
ship, but when they need muscle to back them up, as they most likely will in those deep space, far removed from support situations, you
Hmm.
want a ship that, as Cisco says, has teeth.
Right.
And the Enterprise certainly has its teeth. So
Yeah.
I really like the look. I think that it's I like the darker design. I like the darker interiors with the darker beige and the red carpeting and the burgundy
Hmm.
carpeting and stuff like that. The bridge is more compact, but it's got
Hmm.
more technology is evident. There's more stations for people.
Yeah.
Riker is able to get some information on the planet and everything else right away on the bridge. And
Right.
it's not all coming just from data sitting down here. It's from
Yeah.
multiple positions they can get things. Worf is
Right.
able to step in and has a position right away. Like all those things to me were great. Even Deanna sitting at Picard's side, she's got her own, you know, heads up display, basically relaying her information as well. Instead of on the Enterprise D, she's just kind of sitting there. She doesn't really seem to have anything to do, you
Yeah.
know. And it's just
Yeah.
like that always bothered me a little bit. Like even Riker,
Yeah.
when he's sitting at Picard's side on the Enterprise D, he had a little panel that he
Mm.
could,
Hmm.
assess information from. Meanwhile, she's just like, yeah, I'm just gonna
Yeah.
sit here and look cute, twiddling
I'm
my
just look cute
thumbs,
and feel feelings. I feel feelings.
Yeah.
There are feelings that are being felt.
At least on this one, she could pretend to have something to do,
Right.
review information, maybe help with, evac situations, call up stats and whatever else. All of those things that she's able to do
Right.
with this supposed new display.
Right.
We go to sick bay first. The doctor has new tricorders. There's a new layout in sick bay.
Hmm.
It's way more geared towards service and not so much comfort.
Right.
So like the other sick bay was very big, very open and calming and whatever else. This one is like turn and burn, man. If you're not sick, get out. That
Right.
I like that. And then of course we get to see the emergency medical holographic program, which is
Yes.
a bit of technology that we got to see first actually on Star Trek Voyager. And then, of
Hmm.
course, they've now brought it on to the
Yeah.
Enterprise E as the latest and greatest technology. So, what do you
I
think of the
even
EMH?
Yeah, even though I haven't seen Voyager, I know who the character is and that he's a medical program. And like recently, again, I've told you that like on my YouTube feed, I've been finding more Star Trek 60
Ah,
minute clips keep coming up,
you've been
and one
sucked
of
into the
them,
YouTube algorithm.
oh yeah, man, it's got me. But there's it must I assume it's an episode from Deep Space Nine because it's about Dr. Bashir, and it must be in the
Uh-huh.
future because the guy who plays the what
The
is it called?
doctor, but the
The EMH. You said
EMH,
okay. So the
I
guy,
know what you're talking about.
because I'll just say the scene, and you can correct me if I've got anything wrong. But there's a guy who created the EM8. He's a
Mhm.
technician, but he based the hollow model on himself, and
Yes.
so it's not the character per se from Voyager, but it's definitely the same program, at least the base version. And
Yes.
then there's a Dr. Bashir version being created, and the
Yes.
Dr. Bashir version talks smack about the original in
Uh,
that little clip.
So to give you the EMH backstory, so the guy that you see who created it, his name is Dr. Lewis Zimmerman. He
Okay,
is a genius when it comes to holographic technology,
right,
and he has created this interactive, fully functional doctor, so that in the event that your actual person doctor dies or is incapacitated or otherwise unavailable, you have medical staff. You don't have to
right,
worry about not, you know, being left without a doctor.
right.
In Star Trek Voyager, when when the doctor dies on that show, he is replaced by the EMH, and it
Right.
becomes this, instead of it being a short-term supplementary program, he
It
becomes a
is the
long-term. He
right,
is the doctor
right,
and all the little complications that come with that. In the
right,
episode that you're talking about in Deep Space Nine, which of course we'll get to, in that brief scene, what they're doing is, due to the success of the emergency medical program, they now want to upgrade it and they're trying to
right,
model it off of a new doctor. And
right.
Bashir has been selected to be the EMH Mark II. So
Ah,
they're trying to,
yeah,
figure
and
that
he's
out.
Bashir's wearing the new suit, so I definitely know it's
Yes,
an episode we haven't
it's
come to
coming.
yet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's going to come. I think it's actually towards the end of season 5. So
okay.
we'll get
I'll
there
keep
really
an eye
soon.
out. Yeah, but yeah, his scene was funny because Doctor Crusher and the others need to escape from sickbay from the Borg that are trying to break in. So
Mhm.
she turns him on and says, "I need you to create a distraction." He's like,
I'm
"What
a
do you expect me to
doctor, not a
do?"
doorstop.
Yeah, that's a great line. It was a great line. What a doorstop. And then when they come on, he says, "I understand the Borg. They get kind of itchy, unpleasant
Unpleasant
feelings."
skin, it makes your skin look terrible. I can
Yeah,
get you a cream for that if
yeah.
you want.
And then I mean, he's a Hollows thing, so I forget what they do exactly to him, but
They just deactivate him.
yeah,
They don't see him as a threat, and there's nothing they can
exactly.
really do to him, so
Right,
deactivating him is most likely what happened to him there.
right,
So,
exactly. So it's a funny moment, and again, the great crossover moment as well from
yeah,
Voyager. So
for all of the shows, it's a nice tie-in for continuity that this technology is seen here on all of these, shows and ships and so forth.
right.
Now, another bit of technology that, we should talk about, Geordie's eyes.
Oh yes, great.
Jordy gets an upgrade. So
Yeah,
as you know, all throughout Next Generation, he had that big visor
visor.
on, which was, susceptible to all kinds of things. His brain gets hijacked at one point by some
Oh, that's right. The
Romulans and
Romulans.
Klingons,
Yeah, they
and then
reprogram him
they
through his visor. Yeah.
yeah, and then they do it again with in Generations. They spy on the Enterprise via
hmm
his visor. So the
Yeah.
visor is a bit
Right.
of a liability, and maybe they
But he was also
recognize
able
that.
to see things that weren't normally available to even to human eyes. But he also refused to get mechanical eyes. He was like
Yes.
kind of like I forget all
He
the
didn't no,
storylines
they
that
didn't
he
want him.
focused on it.
He didn't
But
Dr. Pulaski offered him the ability to regrow his eyes, and he
oh,
said
that's right.
no. And
Okay.
now we see that they have upgraded his implants, which is, to fully functioning, yeah, upgraded the
Right.
visor to fully functioning implants. As we see there, a nice electric blue. He can
Yes.
still do a lot of
Very
cool
bright.
things with them. Very, very bright.
Poor
It's
LeVar Burton must have been
alarming.
putting in contacts that were really painful. I
Yeah.
read that the woman who played the Borg Queen was having like can only do it for 4 minutes at a time with the contacts she had in. But yeah, his eyes, Jordy's eyes, they can like zoom, they can see like heat signatures. So they're still upgraded eyes compared to normal. He hasn't like lost his special uniqueness because he's got something new. But it is a great way to show the character has changed since we last saw
Yeah.
him.
And now
Yeah.
we get to see all of LeVar Burton's face. We don't have to,
Yes.
have half of his head blocked off by that
Yeah.
terrible, headband that he had
I still
screwed
don't
on
know
there.
how he acted through that thing after 7 seasons of a show, but
There
man,
are so
he
many
was
stories that he tells about how he could barely see
yeah,
anything, and they block off the stage so everybody can know their positions and stuff, and he was constantly like messing it up
way
because he
off.
couldn't
Yeah,
see.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure he was really glad that they were like, you know what, solve the problem. Here you go, lens
All you had to
cracker
do is wait
solved. Right.
7 years, buddy.
That's right. Contacts are a thing, man. We got you.
Yeah,
We got you.
yeah.
So
Real quickly before we move on, I was thinking also going back to the ship, the Enterprise. When Worf beams aboard, they give him a hard time. They said, "Your little ship is fine." He's like, "Little,
yeah,
huh?"
tou- tough little ship,
Yeah,
little.
little. And then
Which
Riker pulls his leg. He's like, "You still know how to work phaser banks, right? Or phasons?" And
yeah, you should know
Worf,
how to fire phasers. And Worf's look of just, I will
I'm gonna
kill
kill
you
you.
right
Yes,
now. I will kill you. I
yeah.
absolutely will kill you.
Which is great because it does lead up to that fantastic conflict or confrontation between Worf and Picard, where Picard is like, "I don't want
Such
to
a
self-destruct
great
this."
scene. Well,
Yeah,
wait, before we get there, because yes, it is a great scene, but I
you want to hold
do,
it, hold it on.
yeah,
Okay,
just a
we'll hold
little
on to
bit.
it.
I do
Yeah,
want.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
because I now want to. We're jumping all over the place, which is
Of
fine. I
course.
don't care. I hope everybody
Yeah.
is okay with this and can follow along. It's the excitement, guys. There's so much about
Right.
this movie that we want to talk about. It's the excitement. So, one thing that you said, you're talking about Zefram Cochrane, and he's a drunk and he's a partier and whatever else. I know that you were saying that you didn't really appreciate that much. I really did, and the
Mm,
reason I appreciated it is because whenever we hear about these kind of famous pivotal people in history, right? They're always presented to us as these just almost otherworldly people who just knew something that the rest of us didn't. And they
right.
speak with such grandeur and resonance and gravitas, and everything is supposed to be taken with this. Oh man, they just knew they were important from the day they took their first breath, right?
Right. Hmm.
And then it takes a while before we actually start to find out other things about them and realize, yeah, they don't get me wrong, they had great ideas, but they were also like, some of them were bastards, just say it.
Mm,
That's what to me is them capturing here with Sephram Cochrane. Every other representation of Cochrane up to this point was that he was this brilliant man who just only ever thought of the future of humanity and
oh, okay.
propelling them forward, and I do this because it's my dream. And
Right.
then he's like, I did it because I wanted money. I want
Yes.
to retire and
Right.
have naked ladies dancing around me. He even tells them, I don't even like to fly, I take
Yeah.
trains.
Right.
Like he's not doing this for some loftier whatever. He's doing it because he wants to get paid.
Right.
And I just love that because, Riker's even like, well, history will bear out. And, like he even quotes him back to him
Hmm.
eventually. Don't
Yeah.
try to be a great man, just be a man and let history make its own determination.
Yeah.
And it's a great setup
It
because
is a
again,
great.
it's a great setup, but it's
Yeah.
also a great setup because if you flash forward to Enterprise, Zefram Cochrane makes an appearance there as well, and he is doing the full-on standing with his arms crossed, man of the future. Upon this site, an important endeavor will be started, or whatever it is he says. And it's just he's doing the whole pompous thing, and I'm like, literally saw you drink the counselor under the table a couple years
Yes.
ago. So
Yeah.
nice try, guy.
And I assume
Nice try.
Cromwell is still playing him in Enterprise.
Yes,
Yeah.
Cromwell does reprise his role for that
So another great
cameo
example of Star Trek being able to use its history of its own shows to
further
enrich
its
other
own world
parts.
to enrich its
Yeah.
own world.
So that
Yes.
that makes sense. I understand why then. Yeah, you appreciate those scenes. It makes
Yeah.
sense. It's part of a larger storytelling ultimately. Yeah.
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 I mean, it's just like, when I always think about like Abraham Lincoln, for example. We always treat him with such a reverence, which is fine. But at the
Hmm.
same time, there are so many stories of like Lincoln at a young age who used to just fight people.
Yeah.
Like if you
Yep.
didn't if
I'm
you
about to
didn't
say that.
agree
Yeah.
with him or whatever, he would fight you.
He
And
liked wrestling and he would
he
just dare you to
loved
wrestle.
wrestling, right? And he had no problem with just daring you to wrestle like on the spot. And he would just
Yeah.
take you down. He didn't care, and he was a strong guy and he was a big guy, big for that time period. I mean, we always exaggerate Lincoln's height, but I believe that they said at one point he was maybe like 6'3", 6'4", which
Something.
still extremely tall for that time
Right.
period, but a bit more conventional now. But yeah, he would fight people. He had no
Right.
problem with just decking you. You
Right.
know, the same is true of Roosevelt. Roosevelt
Hmm.
was all about just kind of getting dirty and just doing things.
Right.
And yeah, he gave great speeches or whatever. But I mean, the man, yeah, he also wrestled. He also fought. Didn't there at one point? Didn't he get shot and then still gave a speech anyway? Um,
Lincoln? I don't know about that.
no, 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 not Lincoln. Roosevelt.
Oh, I'm sorry, Roosevelt. Yes, you'd moved on. I think that's
Yeah.
actually true. I think Roosevelt had like a bullet in him through like most of his
Yeah,
life or
I'm
something.
pretty sure he got shot. He was supposed to be giving a speech, and he
Oh,
got
that's right.
shot, and he
Yeah, and he
just kept
still
he
gave
kept
the
going.
speech.
Yeah, he was like,
Yeah,
"Yeah, I'm not stopping." I
yeah.
mean,
By the way, Lincoln was 6'4", according to
I,
Wikipedia.
I
But
said
yeah,
6'3", 6'4", you
you
know?
were right. Yeah, just confirming you were right. Yeah. Um, yeah, you're totally. Yeah, it's great that you're pointing that out. That the character, because he also showed up on the original show, the original Star Trek show, this character has a richer history than this one movie might otherwise
Hmm.
indicate. Like myself, I didn't know any of that history,
Yeah.
so it's just like, this character he can come and go as he likes, because I'm ready to move on to other more interesting stuff. But yeah, that's great that I mean, of course he'd be a character that would be visited a time or two. He's got a history that's so important to Star Trek as a
He's
whole. He
he's a
has to be a
focal
region.
point. Yeah, he's a
Yeah, he's
focal point. Without him, there would have never have been first contact with the Vulcans, which never would have started the Federation and Starfleet and all of that. All of those things happened because of
right.
him and his invention.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, he's a very pivotal character. I'm actually surprised that Star Trek didn't do more with him in other shows and iterations or whatever. Like I don't know why they did, instead of doing the prequel Enterprise,
Hmm.
go back further and let us see uh that first contact and what happened after first contact
Yeah.
and moving through, because he obviously would have been the point man that
Right.
the Vulcans continued to deal with. They
Right.
didn't just land and say, "Oh, you built the ship, cool," whatever. He would have always been their point of contact moving forward.
Right.
So I mean, I would
Right.
have liked to see some of that, but then that also starts to get into that area of things about prequels that I hate. And I almost hate that I put that out there, because I would hate for somebody to be like, "We're going to do an all new show," and it's this be the most boring show ever, because they never do them right.
Right. Yeah. Go do I mean, this is where I guess the travel to the past works out. Do an episode where you travel to the past, you answer some questions, and then you're done.
Yeah. But then you also get into that worry of you're now trying to over explain every single minute detail of a world building that you've done, and
Right.
then you ruin it. Because as
Yeah.
we've talked about before, the more specific you get on your world building, the more you get into trouble, because now you have to explain the precise mechanics behind how something works.
Right.
And when the science fails or the whatever it is fails, now your whole thing that you've built up topples like a house of cards.
Right.
So yeah, don't do that. Don't do that,
Yeah.
please. Let's see. Do I have anything else that I wanted to talk to you about? Oh, yes, we have to talk about the date. When the Enterprise comes back in time, they arrive on April 4th, 2063. This is the day
Mhm.
before first contact, or 2 days before first contact. Um, 2063, man. So it's 2023 now. So
That's
that's only
40
40 years
years.
away.
Yeah.
So do you think you'll still be around?
Well, I
And,
mean, World War III is supposed to have happened between now and then, and what,
well, I mean,
700 million people have died according to the stats they
yeah.
give, and
According to both Deep Space Nine and Strange New Worlds, the World War III should be kicking off within the next 3 to 5 years, give or take.
I don't know, man. I think 2024 with everything going on, especially here in America. I don't know. Maybe they might be right. They got their timing
Ugh,
down pretty well.
well,
We'll
I
find
need
out. But
need to get
um,
started on building my bunker then, because I want
yeah,
to. I got 40 years to get through
yeah.
before I'm heading up to Bozeman to angrily shake my cane. Where's the Vulcans? Where's the Vulcans?
Yeah. This was all history, wasn't it? Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. It's always fun to kind of think about what the future might hold, and it's also fun. I mean, as you've mentioned, and when we've talked about some of these histories being having to be kind of like retconned a bit,
Hmm.
because certain dates come and go, and so, oh, the one date that was supposed to be like the date has come and gone in real life, and so now they have to push it forward to, oh, now it's something else that triggered this particular event, and it's a little bit further down. Um, but I think you said at that point, it's like, just go ahead and have the alternate history. Like, don't quit trying to retcon the history of Star Trek. Like, if this
Well,
is the date when something is supposed to have happened, and just because in the real world it didn't, doesn't mean the Star Trek continuity can't just continue with that alternate history, right?
Well, that's what, yes, because that's what Star Trek was so good at for a while, was they would tell you about these events, but they would never give you specific dates. So when
Hmm.
people were always trying to make things fit into a certain timeline, that's where their issue would fall apart, not Star Trek's issue, because Star
Right,
Trek never said solidly this was the day,
right,
but they got into some issues with that when they started giving out actual dates, like in the Deep Space Nine episode where Bashir, Cisco, and Dax are transported back in time, and the
right.
whole Bell riots, everything happened. They give us a date, So that's how we knew when that was supposed to happen.
Right.
Now in this movie, they've given us yet another date, so we know where we're supposed to be with certain other things.
Right.
Strange New Worlds also, they are the ones who kind of fudge the timeline a bit when it comes to when the Third World War is supposed
Right.
to have happened, because they don't say, but they also give you a little bit of clues that tell you that it's again sometime in the late 2020s to 2030s. It's in there somewhere.
Right.
Um, so yeah, and then, Riker even says here, oh, it's what, a decade after World War III. So we know now that World War III would have had to have ended sometime in the 2050s to 2040s to 2050s. So yeah, I mean, a lot of information here that kind of throws off timelines, but they're losing their ability to fudge things the more they do stuff like this. And
Right.
I don't want them to lose that. Because yeah, you're right. Like the longer that they can hold that off on giving us clear dates on things, the more you can your story, stretch your story and include other things in it. And
Right.
Star Trek is too old of a franchise to lose that now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um.
But they still
Yeah.
celebrate First Contact Day. If you play Star Trek Online, as a matter of fact, every year on April the 5th, you can log on and go to Bozeman, Montana, and take part in First Contact activities. You can launch your own mini Phoenix. You can tour the site. You can see the statue. You can do all of these things. You can listen to music in the bar. You can
Right.
see the site where the Vulcan ship landed, because it's there. It's kind of what they did in Lower Decks as well. You can go there, and all these things are set up to kind of take you through a historical blast from the past there. So if you're interested at all, go play the game, go to Bozeman, see the stuff. I love that about Star Trek, how even on the supplementary things, the
Hmm.
franchisey things, they still incorporate a lot of this stuff and
Right.
make it to where you can be as much or as little a part of it as you want to.
Right. Right. Yeah. That sounds like a lot of fun. I mean, you did Star Trek Online for a bit,
I did.
right?
When the game first came out, probably 20 years ago now. I remember when I got it, and it was a monthly subscription. It was $15 a month to
Hmm.
play it, and now it's free. Now you just got to download it and you can play it.
Okay.
But yeah, it was $15 a month. They didn't really have a whole lot of content.
Right.
There was like one major storyline you could play through, which a lot of it was had the voiceover by Leonard Nimoy as Spock.
Mm.
As far as I know, the game still starts that way. It still starts with Leonard Nimoy's Spock giving you a bit of an introduction, and
Right.
then as you take any number of missions and whatever else, it leads you through a bunch of different stuff.
Right.
They update fairly regularly. Multiple actors from Star Trek have now lent their voices for their characters on the game. I know that just recently, Kate Mulgrew, who plays Captain Janeway, was featured in a multi-story arc that actually ended up tying her in with Lita from Deep Space Nine, with
Mm.
Tilly from Discovery, Doctor Crusher, Wesley Crusher. Um, Even at some point, Chekhov and Scotty are there. There's other missions. Harry Kim from Voyager is there. Seven of Nine, Tuvok, Major Kira shows up. I mean, they all kind of come back in some regard. I know that Geordie LaForge is there. Worf is there. Riker is there. Deanna's there. I think the only ones who really aren't there are people who've either
Deep Space Nine.
people who've either unfortunately passed on, or for whatever reason they're like I don't think Picard, I don't think Patrick Stewart has lent his voice yet.
Oh, interesting.
Avery Brooks has not. Um, I don't think William Shatner has either. But pretty much everyone else has, if they are living, they have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah,
Interesting.
it's so if for no other reason than if you want to like experience new stories and new missions with those people, hearing their voices again, there's ample content online for you to do so. So
Right.
go check it out. You got to do a lot to get the ship that you want, though. They start you off with a dinky little Miranda class ship. But if you want any of the Enterprises or the Defiant or Voyager or whatever, you got to work for it. You can't
Right.
pay for them. You can't just go in and buy them. You
Uh-huh.
have to do missions to earn the points to get them. So
Ah.
be prepared for the grind, man.
Gotcha.
Now, last but not least, we must talk about this particular character, the Borg Queen.
I was gonna say, yeah, we haven't
As
talked about her at all. So
yeah, as we know, before this, there was no Borg Queen. The Borg had a very decentralized collective, massive numbers of individuals becoming one, and the hive mind making all the decisions.
right.
Now we find that the power behind that voice, behind that collective, is all streamlined into the, what do you want to call
Borg
her?
Queen.
The
Yeah.
scintillatingly creepy Borg Queen,
Yeah.
played by
That
Alice
great
Creech.
that great moment when she appears and she's just a the shoulders and head with the
The shoulder
spine
with the
and then
wiggling
just
spine,
and it
and then
just
she
sinks
sits
into the
down into the
body.
body.
Great,
Yeah.
great creepy moment. Great introduction to a character. Um so as you just insinuated, this does seem to kind of retcon the Borg as we've understood them. They are not
Mhm.
centralized. There is no leader. Data asks, "Are you the leader?" And she never says yes. I mean, so part of me feels like
She
they would.
doesn't say no either. She
Yes,
says
exactly.
she's what does she say? You imply a disparity where none exists. So
Yes,
I always took that to mean like, 'cause by him asking if she's the leader,
right,
he's basically saying, "Are you the one who you're giving orders?" And so what her response to him implies is that there is no order. There's no, I'm not issuing decrees. We don't operate that way.
right.
It's still an informed decision, but she is kind of the clarion call for the decision. Basically,
Right.
she's not enforcing her own will.
Right.
She is just the
She's the
amalgamation of the will of the
she is
collection
the
of the
ultimate
collective.
expression of the will of the Borg,
Yes. Yes.
which is actually kind of a fun and fascinating idea. There's even some religious connotations to that as well, by the way. Jesus is the full image of the Father, kind of. Jesus is anyway. So that kind of fits in there. Is what I'm getting at. But part of me, I'll just put it directly. So many sci-fi series have a queen of some kind. Do you have an overly powerful enemy group that seems overwhelming in their power and just like they're just the worst? Give them a queen. Then we have a
And then,
central focus point. And
now that you say that, that is correct. And then it's also, especially if they're villainous.
yes,
If the enemy is like that and they're villainous, how do we top their villainy? We give them a queen who
right.
is more evil, more sadistic
Right. Well, she's the
than all of them.
driving force behind all of the alien evilness. Like she
Yes.
and to be very clear, just kill the king, then they win. Now, I'll say two things to that. First, as you know, I love Ender's Game, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I feel Ender's Game is the series that started this trope. But I also feel they did the best that Orson Scott Card did the best job with the trope because the whole point behind the Ender's Game version of the trope is that it's an alien species and they are literally communicating on a level that's not understood by humans. So humanity and these formic aliens can't communicate with each other because the queens are the only ones that have any sort of individuality and they control the hive. And so when humanity realizes what the queens are, they know they have to kill the queens in order to stop the aliens. If they just kill the drones, it doesn't matter. And the aliens don't realize that humanity, everyone's an individual. And so they've been just kind of mass murdering just what they think are just like ants, just drones. They just think they're killing off drones. If they could find an equivalent queen mind to go with, then they would match up. So I feel like Ender's Game does it in a very interesting way.
Mm.
But then there's things like I'm just the most recent example I can think of because I again saw a clip on YouTube was Independence Day's sequel, Resurgence or something,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and terrible movie. And in the first
I didn't
movie,
watch it.
in
I
the
didn't
first
watch
movie
it.
they don't have a queen, but in the second one they have a queen, and she's massive and she's huge and she's got a gun. Like this giant alien thing is holding this gun around, and it looks so ridiculous. Anyway, Point is, they kill the queen. If you kill the queen, you usually kill all the aliens, and they all like their chips in their brains go turn off, and they can't communicate anymore. Now, the Borg queen, to be very clear, she dies along with all the other Borg. It's not like they kill her and everything ends when
Yeah,
Data.
they don't so much kill her and then they all just drop. They release that coolant and everyone in the room dies. Everyone
Right.
that gets touched by the coolant dies.
Right. And the only
Because yeah,
problem with that is that we don't see that every single Borg on the ship is affected. It does feel like they kind of missed that. I mean, if the idea is that there are individual Borg that can go out and they can, as an individual Borg, start recreating themselves and recreating the consciousness and to technology and assimilating. They can individually do that. Then we don't need the Borg Queen to be alive,
so
but it does feel like that's almost kind of what they're implying because she dies. There are no other Borg left to do it,
so
apparently.
it's
But
I believe that the way that we're supposed to interpret that is that the queen is she's like a processor.
yeah,
And so she sends out all of the instructions. She's not making the instructions, she's just relaying it. They
yes,
use her as a massive relay. So when the
right,
relay dies, the connection of all the drones is severed. So
okay,
that's why they all die because they lost their processor. That's what so
right.
that's why
And I
they all because we do see when she starts to when she falls into the stuff and then she starts to break up and scream and deteriorate, the other Borg that were in their alcoves and were safe high up above, they also started screaming and exploding. And Picard does that pass, he runs by them, and
right,
they're all tucked away in their alcove. Clearly, should be safe, but they all start exploding and whatever else
right,
because that's what happens to her. But it's
right.
not so much because she was their queen and they're sacrificing themselves along with their leader. It's more because they lost the person who was giving them access to the greater mind.
Right. Well, my I guess my point is then is that because she fits the stereotype of the alien queen. You kill the alien
Yeah,
queen and you defeat the army of the alien enemy. And again, I'm not saying that this is exactly this situation. Maybe let's
yeah,
just simplify that while the Borg Queen exists in this moment, she is the central point of like all the processing power per se.
yes.
And in the moment the Borg are affected, but the individual Borg units, if they aren't killed, could then get themselves back up and continue working. Maybe that's what would have happened if things had
If they
continued.
if only she had fallen in the coolant and died, while there may have been some Borg that were affected, the collective itself should have adapted,
Right,
and then the other Borg would have continued on. So to
right.
that point, I will say this: as much as I love the Borg Queen, and in particular Alice Creech, I think she does a fantastic job
She
here.
does. Yes.
I feel like,
Creepy and sexy in that like,
yeah, is
oh, I
yeah,
don't why Data, why are you kissing that thing?
like why are you kissing her? But then I totally get why you're kissing her. So it's
Yeah,
like, yeah,
yeah.
but all of that to say, um, I always have felt like the creation of the Borg Queen was the misstep for Star Trek. They
Yeah.
never should have done it. Once the Queen is created, it then gave she became a plot point to
Right.
use to make the Borg weaker and less threatening. And
Right.
this is something that comes up later on in Voyager
Right.
because Janeway deals with the Borg a lot because again the Voyager's lost in Delta Quadrant. That's
Mhm.
the Borg home base.
Right.
So um, it comes up a lot, and it's one of the main arguments that people use when they critique Voyager is that Voyager made the Borg dumber and accessible,
Right.
and therefore made them easier to defeat. When they were
Right.
this ginormous, barely comprehensible thing that operated truly from a hive mind. We saw no
Yes.
individuals, we saw no voices, no
Right.
one voice, we saw no one body. It
Right.
made them way more scary, way more
Yes.
ominous, way more threatening. And
I
they
feel
took
the
that
same way.
down and gave us
100%.
something to focus on. And I
Yes.
I have to like again, I loved Alice Creed. I've watched her in a
Right.
lot of things, and even in this, I still think she did a great job, and I don't fault her at all.
Right.
It's the creation of the queen persona that
Right.
I don't like, and I wish they had never done it.
Well, yeah, I fully agree, and that's why I've been talking about the queen stereotype or trope. But for me, I think like the moment when Picard comes and confronts her and says, "You wanted Locutus as a conduit to humanity. You wanted him to kind of be the bridge between the two sides." Like, if she was that on
You
some
know
level,
what? That's a great point. I see what you're gonna say. Yes, if
yeah,
they had made her for the movie, right, but then said, just throwing in that like kind of a line there, just saying in the same way that Locutus was to be a conduit to humanity,
right.
the Queen has now been created to be a conduit to Data
Yes,
because they
that's
were focused
exactly.
on
And I feel
Data.
like the movie is making that point up until Picard
Yeah,
shows up. She's the one giving him skin. She's like doing all the stuff
she's
for him.
way into
You
Data. She's
you
yeah.
want to be human? Look, I'm already there. Basically, I'm the one who can
I'm
lead you
what
there.
I am what you would become.
Right.
I am the female version of what you would become. If you give
Exactly.
in to us, we will
Right.
make you like me. I
Which is
have emotions. I can
right.
feel these things. I've
I
got
can turn your
skin. I've got
chip on.
yeah.
Yeah.
That
And
should have been how they did that. Like, but
yes.
like say that. Don't make it implied.
Yes.
We shouldn't have to be reviewing this movie some 25 years later and
Right.
being like and making the connection for them.
Well,
That's a great point.
and what I'm really getting at too is that this should be an isolated incident. It should never have
Yes.
showed up on Voyager. Now, I know why they did. The character had appeared here, the actress had appeared. It's a hey, it's fan service. You saw the character over on First
Well,
Contact. Now you can see him on Voyager.
Well, even
But
then, they actually screw that up because they use a different actress to play
oh,
the
do
Borg
they?
Queen on Voyager
Oh, okay.
on a couple of occasions. But then when they have the final big showdown on Voyager,
Right.
Alice Krige does come back and reprise her role
Gotcha.
as the Queen. But there's
Got it.
this other one who is the Queen for a little bit.
Right.
But yeah, it was just like they don't explain it very well, and yeah, it was you shouldn't have done it. You shouldn't have had the Queen.
Right.
But
Well, and
yeah,
here's the other thing I was thinking of. This would have been maybe almost too much for a movie like this. Star Trek has been in general a kind of like it's not a horror show. It's not about the
no.
horror. The
Right.
Borg are the most horrific species they've ever encountered, and we can talk about more of the horrific things that happen to characters. Like for example, they stick those things in people's cheeks, and then they start immediately starting to be affected, and their skin bubbles, and they
Oh,
get
the
gray, and
the insertion tubules.
yes, and they start
Okay.
getting assimilated like immediately, which is horrifying. And then like Picard kills one of the Borg and starts digging around in the guts, and it's Ensign somebody.
Ensign
And
Lynch.
yeah,
And he
and
shoots him and
that's
then pulls the processing chip out of him.
yeah. And later we find out that Picard actually had stuff in him. Like back on the show, it felt like all they did was just external. They
Very
put stuff on his
superficial. Very
body.
yeah.
Like his hand still existed, but they put something at the end of his hand when he's got
Yeah,
something
because
on
he
it.
that's right, he sticks his hand out and they slide the little sleeve over him,
Right.
whereas
But in this,
in this movie, we see that they've cut off the guy's arm and
and they
attached a
attach it,
metal ball thing
and
so
it's
they can slip it.
creepy.
It's
I mean,
awful.
they don't focus on it so much that you're like,
Body horror.
yeah,
Body horror.
they don't go too far into it to make it like I can't watch this, but they do enough of
Mm.
it to show you the horror of what the Borg are. Especially again, as I'm emphasizing, they didn't really do that before, and again, as the Wikipedia page is pointing out, they really emphasized that there are internal effects and
Yeah.
changes
And then
more so than
that
external.
became the very much the new modus operandi for the Borg going forward. And
Right,
it's just a clear extension of the fact that when they first introduced the Borg, there was very little money for
right,
this. And then
yes,
as the show's popularity and stuff improved, they of
right,
course went back and they made this enemy more menacing and more ever and everything else, which is another reason why people harp on Voyager for making the Borg suck because it's
right,
just like you developed this enemy and you made them even scarier
right,
in your movie outing and everything else, and then you turn around and you dumb them down so that like we watch here in this movie, this brand new top of the line, state of the art, massively powerful Enterprise E barely survives its
right.
encounter with one
Borg
Borg
cube.
cube and
Mhm.
spear respectively here. But then all of a sudden, you drop a small Intrepid class, only like 12 deck ship, minimal power, minimal complement, whatever, in the middle of their home base,
Right.
and somehow they're able to just beat them all.
Is that
So yeah,
okay? Yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
So it's a problem for
Right.
sure.
Well, what
That
I was gonna
yeah.
get at with the Borg Queen was like we never see where the human skin element of her comes from. I mean, clearly they can develop human skin, or at the very least, they're repurposing human skin from
I
some
was
other
gonna say that's
people.
most likely what they're doing. They're
Right.
during the assimilation process, they're probably cutting off skin from others and
Giving
putting
it to
it
Data.
where it needs to be to other
Right.
people. Yeah.
But I mean, if they had wanted to go full body horror, they could have said that the Borg Queen is actually like there was actual a human woman. This is how badly she was assimilated. Like her head and her shoulders are still you can still recognize who she
Ah.
was, but that human is so gone. Like Picard got out lucky. The fact that he was able to be unassimilated and recovered back to normality, this woman they didn't stop. The Borg didn't
So
they didn't play nice with this woman maybe, but again this is just me speculating.
yeah.
As we saw with like the cutting off arms and such, like yeah, Picard got off easy. They were going to be nice about assimilating humanity. They were going to assimilate them in a kind of more passive way, but now they're like more aggressive because like, oh, we see humanity's fought back, we got to be
So
more
this
direct or something.
so my thought actually feeds into what we were saying earlier about her being a conduit to data because
Hmm.
initially the explanation given for why Picard didn't have the full body modification and arms being cut off and everything else was they wanted him to be that conduit for humanity. They wanted humanity to not resist so much. So
Right.
by leaving him relatively unchanged, it was the hope that not just through his voice, because even remember, no Borg that we've encountered before has an accent of any kind. And yet when Picard spoke as Locutus, he still had his accent. And the explanation
Right.
for that in universe being they were trying to leave him while assimilated, they wanted
Right.
him as unmodified as possible so
Exactly.
that
Yes.
people would further identify with him.
Right.
So to that end, it would also explain why if we go with the queen was supposed to be the queen that we see here is supposed to be a conduit for data. That's the reason she comes to him and she is so cybernetic because
Hmm.
data is full on machine.
Right.
So by showing him that there is another step where he can, I mean, you look at her, she's sweating
Right.
when she comes down, she's glistening with sweat. She's got, the red lips, she's got warm skin, but she's also we just saw your skeleton, lady,
Yeah, and when she's
So
dead and all that flesh is burnt off, she's like more
she's a
robot
robot,
looking.
right?
Yeah.
She's a T-800 under all that
That's a great reference. Yeah, 100%.
nonsense.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that was the whole point. So if they had again, if they had given that explanation that she is to be the conduit to data to show
Right.
him a new level of cybernetic existence to make him
Right.
want to do what she said,
Right.
that would have made for a way more compelling storyline. But then they flub it up because when Picard eventually gets there and shows up and they're talking, they try to make it seem like secretly these two had really had this connection all along, and she was really using data to
Right.
kind of not necessarily get to
Well,
Picard, but
and
get back
that's
at him for
right, and that's the
leaving.
problem because she says, "Don't you remember me?" And then we get a flashback, and he did know
And
her. She's been there the whole
right.
time.
That is
Yeah,
the problem. That
yeah,
never needed to happen. That did not
yes,
need to happen. They
exactly.
could
Like,
have still done flashbacks just to show that Picard was still very much struggling with this trauma, but they
right,
did not need to have the flashbacks where she's like running her hand over his lips and stuff, like
yes,
she's somehow attracted to him as well.
exactly.
That's kind of like the
Yeah, it's too
insinuation.
much. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
that was a bit much.
yeah.
Didn't need that.
Um, so yeah, I wish the character had been more focused. Like she's a conduit for data, and because remind me, because near the end of TNG, there was the episode where Data's other android brother had
Lore.
got he had got there was the Hugh Borg who had gained his individuality after being with the TNG crew, and then he had
Mhm.
spread that, and they had come under Lore's influence for a time. Like I feel like that would have been that's where she could have been like, we saw that you assimilated us, now we're going to assimilate you, or something,
It would
Um,
they could have used that as a way to explain why they were so suddenly fascinated with Data beyond the encryption
exactly.
thing,
Right.
because they would have had experience through Hugh and
Right.
learning about what happened to Hugh and those other Borg that had splintered off because of lore.
Right.
Yeah,
And
that would
maybe
have.
the explanation for where the Hive Queen comes from is that they used the Hive Queen against Lore. Maybe Lore's been killed or something, and oh, we were the Borg, and we figured out the way to take care of Lore was to create this human. The other way around, the android who wants to be human. Uh, anyway, and then we're going to use it on you. That would have been a fun little twist, actually.
Mm.
I'm the same one who killed your brother Lore. I know how to get to you through your brother Lore, kind of stuff. But you'd had to have known TNG really,
Yeah,
really well.
that would have made that would have made this movie one of those deep cuts,
Oh, 100%.
a great movie, but unless you really had watched like literally everything,
And
you
remembered
wouldn't
it
you
all nicely.
yeah,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have appreciated it. Now to the diehard fan, this would have been a fantastic movie if we had done that. We
Right.
never would have shut up. It would have been on the level of The Wrath of Khan even.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
so I understand they were also trying to make sure they had something that was accessible to as many people as possible, because this is also at the time that Star Trek on TV was starting to have a little bit of a waning period here.
Hmm.
Deep Space Nine was in full go, as was Voyager here. But again, we're coming up on the end of season 5. Deep Space Nine only has 2 more seasons. Then
Right.
you just would have had the only show on being Voyager.
Right.
And when Voyager ends, they don't do another Trek show for another, like, I think it's like 4 or 5 years in between
Before Enterprise shows
Voyager and
up.
Enterprise. And then when Enterprise ended, there was no Trek for like 10 years.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
yeah, a lot of interesting things happening here in this movie, and then play into other stuff in Trek later on. Um But as we're wrapping up here, coming to the end, we've been talking here for an hour and 30 minutes, almost the full runtime of the movie. If we stay on for another 20 minutes, it will be anyway.
Yeah. Exactly.
Um, but final thoughts. What did you think of First Contact? Would you watch it again? I should say.
Yeah, I definitely would. Again, even knowing that the character of Cochrane has more to do with the rest of Star Trek lore, those parts just they never had quite the draw of just the bizarreness of the Borg. The Borg are a fascinating idea.
Mhm.
The idea that there's some culture out there. I mean, I really want to know the history of the Borg. The idea that maybe
Oh,
there's
do you?
there's some culture way out in the Delta Quadrant who had the idea of enhancing themselves with cybernetics, and it got out of hand and it destroyed their society, and they started going out and they just like there was a civilization once that is now long gone because they became Borg. They Borgified themselves. That's my theory how it happened.
So allow me to give you a little history.
Okay, yeah, go for it.
There is actually a story about how the Borg came to be, and how actually the very first true Borg are humans. So there is
Which
a book.
makes sense in a sense because they
Yes,
are very humanoid, but I mean we have a lot of humanoid species. But yeah, go ahead.
there is a book. I'll have to look up whether or not the book is considered canon after I remember what it's called. I know I have it somewhere, but I've been moving, so it's somewhere in here.
Right.
But basically, the premise of the book is that there was an ancient all robotic race, okay, and
Ooh,
they were highly advanced to the point that they didn't even necessarily have robot bodies. They kind of like floated around in these kind of um, and programmable matter is the best way to think about it. Like whatever they wanted, they could manipulate the matter around them to become the thing, to the
okay.
point where it seemed like magic, but really it was like super advanced nanotechnology. Okay,
Okay.
so they existed in deep space. They actually existed in a different realm of speculative, like a subspace pocket, basically, and they were just this super advanced civilization. And somehow or another, the crew of the NX-02, which if you watched Enterprise, you know that the first Enterprise was the NX-01. Its sister ship that was launched, the NX-02, called the Columbia, and its captain, I forget what her name is. Man, I'm so bad at this right now. But anyway, in the book, somehow she and her crew get transported several 100,000 years into the past
Mm,
and into this subspace pocket where they exist with this race. And at first, the race didn't want to have anything to do with them, but then through communication and them wanting to like because the humans are dying. They
mm,
decide they want to save them. So they
right,
do help them and save them, and they save them by giving them some of their technology
right,
and putting it into their bodies.
right,
It does save them. It makes them better than before, but they're not assimilated. They're not being controlled.
right,
They now have cybernetic implants.
right.
And then it's been a while since I've read it, but something happens to them to where they get like half the race gets like obliterated, and the other half is like almost dead, and they're trying to pull themselves together to so that they can still survive.
Hmm.
And this leads to them pulling in the humans. And as the story goes, the last word that the last fully human person was saying before they were assimilated
Hmm.
was, "I don't want to be a cyborg." And that is the last word ever uttered by a human in
Ah,
this grouping. I'm describing this terribly. I will go get the book and I will go over it. But I remember reading it and it was actually a very sad and also kind of terrifying like
oh, it
scene that
sounds
was
like it.
described
Yeah.
because it was like it was all a series of unfortunate events and accidents that caused it to happen. No one at any point was being malicious. They were
Mm,
just it was just they were at one point they were starving, then they were dying, then they were like
right,
fighting, and they were just it was a constant struggle every single step of the way until
right.
finally there was nothing left. They had no
Yeah,
other choice. If they wanted to
yeah.
survive, this thing had to happen. And then they stopped being humans and stopped being this other race, and they were just Borg.
Something else.
And
Yeah.
they were yeah,
The,
and
and
they
and
didn't
be very
know
clear.
yeah.
And I like. I think that really kind of jives with my idea of what the Borg were. That they weren't like the Borg. I don't think initially started off as a malicious
Yeah,
race, as a homicidal. We're going to assimilate your culture race. I think they grew into that. They were like a
yeah.
cancer.
And
Something
it's like yeah,
happened.
because it was like there were these ideas that the groups had that ended up getting like warped and twisted as they went through all these different struggles. And so
Right.
then it kind of all these things got distilled down to this one, a need to survive at any cost,
Yes.
and this desire to go from being like a better version of yourself to a desire for perfection. So
Right.
you put those two things together, and you got this very ruthless, malicious thing out there
Right.
that is moving across. And you're right, like moving through the new universe. Because when they finally dropped out of their pocket of space or whatever, they were
Uh-huh.
in this area where there was again basically nothing. So now they had to survive at all costs, and it was just they moved through the area like a cancer, sucking up resources every which way they could out of the fear of if they don't have it, they will die. So they
Right.
were just taking everything.
Right. There's a on Wikipedia. There's a non-canon origin stories entry under the Borg stuff, and I don't know if it has what we're
What's
talking
the name
about.
of it?
But,
What does it say the name of the book
well,
is? Or
there's the Lost Souls version, the novel Lost Souls, the third book in the Star Trek Destiny trilogy.
that's it. That's the one.
Lost Souls.
The
Okay.
Star Trek Destiny trilogy. I read all of it. I read the whole trilogy. That is the book. That is the book series that it talks about all of that in. It's the only
Yeah.
one that I've ever read that detailed all of that for the
Yeah.
Borg. I
The
didn't know whether or not it
Kalir
was
city of Mantilus.
yes,
Yeah. The Columbia. Something happened. Something happened.
the
Something.
USS Columbia. Yeah, it was a fascinating book to read because it obviously it does deal with time travel, but there's a lot of stuff in there that's like it deals with um again, what would you do to survive?
Hmm.
And dealing with technology that's almost indistinguishable from magic.
Hmm.
When should you use technology or not? Kind of like their own version of the Prime Directive. And
Hmm.
then like there are growing factions in between all these different groups and who's going to
Right.
do what. And the captain of the Columbia, she's the first one who gets the benevolent assimilation treatment.
Right.
And
Maybe that was the Borg Queen. There you go. That's her origin story.
well, she wasn't well, so now another lore, another one that gives us a Borg origin story is there was a game called Star Trek Legacy,
Yeah, it's
and it
also
came out
here.
maybe
Yeah.
like 15 years ago. And in that one, the very first Borg queen was Vulcan.
Uh-huh.
And they used a Vulcan because of their mental capacity. And they also found that while Vulcans in general were great for the various processing that they did, Vulcan females in particular were the best. And so
Uh-huh.
wherever possible, the queens were made out of Vulcan females.
Yeah,
Um,
it says something about that here
yeah.
in
So
this
there's
article.
a lot of them that go around. I'm so proud of myself for having remembered some of these off the cuff here. But yeah, there's a
Yeah,
lot of origin things out there about the Borg.
right.
Um, none of them that totally explains it perfectly,
Yeah.
which I think is great. I love that there's still speculation and that they give us great stories for that. I think it would upset me if I had a concrete, very boring one.
Right.
I know that Star Trek also did like another Borg-ish thing in the original series with a supercomputer called Landru, I think. And Landru was kind of a prototype Borg thought that they had back in the 60s.
Right.
There is no being. There's only Landru. That was the language. That's how it spoke.
Right.
So yeah, I mean the Borg notion pops up a lot, but I feel like this is the first time that they ever really kind of got it together to
Uh-huh.
give us something for at least a movie reference here.
Right.
Well, all right, David, I think that we have kind of covered everything. Is there anything you can think of since we're almost to the same running time of the movie? Is there anything else you can think of that we haven't talked about that we can squeeze in here in this last 9 minutes?
Actually, there is one thing. So, looking up trying to figure out when this movie falls into Deep Space Nine, I actually read somewhere that this actually might fall into later season 5 than we currently are at. While the movie came out on November 22nd, and the episode we just did, Rapture, came out on December 30th,
Uh-huh.
there is some people trying to figure out where the timeline of the episodes and the movies come out. Someone was saying that it would even be like as late as episode 23 of season 5. So we're on episode 10 right now. So like still a number of episodes out. Now some said, yeah, the uniforms changing is proof that this is when it would happen. And Worf definitely was in charge of Defiant last we checked with
Mhm.
him. So it makes sense that he would be in charge of Defiant. There's an explanation in the movie for why he took the Defiant out from Deep Space Nine, other than the Borg were showing up and they got everyone they could. But I wonder if I imagine the show will have to address at some point, hey, the Defiant is getting repairs because it was in the
The
Borg
Defiant
fight.
is unavailable. I don't know if that ever comes up. We'll have to go back. I'll have to go back and pay, I guess, extra attention to see if in the coming episodes there's ever a time where Worf just is not around, and then we can just be like, oh, and Worf. It has to be that Worf and the Defiant are unavailable. Whether they say explicitly that he has gone back to Earth or whatever it is, it
Right,
that doesn't necessarily matter. It just needs to be that Worf and the Defiant are unavailable because they could have just been like out on patrol or doing maneuvers or something like that, and then they got the call about the Borg and they immediately took off and went there.
right.
There's no need for it to be, oh, they left from Deep Space Nine with this specific intent to
Yes.
go to
Fair
fight
enough.
the
Yeah,
Borg.
yeah, yeah,
So
for
yeah,
sure. Yeah, we've had
so
plenty of
that's
times when you've been out on a mission and suddenly you're
an emergency call comes in and you're diverted from what you're
right,
doing. So that's all we need to pay attention to. Anytime coming up where Worf and the Defiant are unavailable, that would have been the most likely time that this occurred.
right. And if I'm just saying, it would have been fun if our Deep Space Nine cast had been on the Defiant and had been able to participate in some capacity.
It would have been a wholly
But why
different
is
movie,
Worf the only one there?
because that's why.
Maybe everything happening on Earth with the Earth's characters that was our Deep Space Nine cast. It was Cisco who had been sent down. Hey, you're not in charge of the Enterprise anyway. We need someone down on the planet. Why don't you go down and supervise? I mean, you helped to create the Defiant. You know technology. Um,
It it would have been such a powerful scene. that instead of Worf on the bridge with Picard telling him to blow up the Enterprise, if it
Yeah.
was Cisco and
We didn't talk about
Picard
that scene.
face
We
to
didn't talk about
face.
that scene. You stopped me.
Oh, okay.
It was a
Sorry.
great scene
Yes.
because Cisco. I'm sorry, Cisco.
Yeah,
Man,
sorry.
I
Yeah, now
switched over.
yeah. When
Picard.
because Worf is telling him, blow up the ship, we need to
Yes.
cut our losses.
Right.
Picard's like, we're gonna stay and fight.
Right.
And then he's gets in his face, he's like, you want to run away, you coward.
Yeah.
And Worf's like, if you
If
were
you were
any other man, I would kill you
anyone
where you
else.
stand. I was like, yes, 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 he would. Yes, Worf would
Yes.
have killed you.
Yeah.
That's
Yes. And
it's
it
a
is true
great
that only
delivery.
Picard. Yeah.
Only Picard. Worf
Yeah.
gives such a Michael Dorn gives a great performance here with so little words and just all of it. You can see the
Yeah.
anger in his face and everything else. The way he says it, I was like, yeah, I believe it. He's got that
Right.
necklace still back there, Jean-Luc. You might want to shut up. You're gonna pull it out and have your arm tied around his
Yeah.
leg. You keep
Yeah.
talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great moment too because he says all that after the one of the security guys comes back and says the Borg keep overrunning our checkpoints, and Picard's like, "Go back and do hand-to-hand combat if you have to," and that's when Worf is like, "Nah, man, we gotta scuttle the ship and end this now." And it's Worf who, of any character out there, as we just saw, could do hand-to-hand combat. But
Which
if
he was the
Worf is
only if
saying,
you watch those scenes, Worf is the only one who successfully hand-to-hand fought a Borg besides
other
Data.
than Data, yes, yes,
Besides Data, because
yeah,
in that scene when they're in the corridor, not on the deflector dish,
outside,
in the
yep,
corridor, Worf, the Borg was too close to him at first for him to shoot.
right,
So he bashes him and then
right,
he shoots the other one down the hall. And then later on, he also cuts down another one. And then you see another guy, a human guy, try the same maneuver Worf does with the butt of the phaser
hmm
rifle, and it
right.
just hits the Borg in the chest, and the Borg's like, be gone, and just backhands him.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah,
Worf is the only one besides Data who can
right,
handle fighting the Borg
right,
hand to hand. And
right.
here's Picard saying, "Get back down there, fight
Yeah,
hand to hand, do
yeah,
it."
yeah.
Yeah.
Come on, Picard. You
He's
got to
like,
know when
"Wait,
you're. Yeah,
earlier didn't you just say don't let them touch you? Now you're all hand to hand, man.
yeah. That's actually
Get
a
it?"
good point too. And it also puts a finger on the fact that Picard was emotionally affected, which is
Yeah,
why he wasn't allowed to bring the Enterprise into the fight in the first place.
yeah.
Another great example, though, of like the Enterprise coming to the battle just in time for the worst of it to have already happened and save the day.
Yeah,
I mean, the Federation ships going up against cubes have been decimated in two
a
different
lot,
battles, 5 years
of
apart from each
times. Yeah,
other. I don't know how they're going to fight anyone else. There's actually a great moment when the cube was blowing up, where there's a Federation ship that's trying to do like trying to like pull out, and like the debris hits it and makes it explode. I
yeah,
was like, yeah, man. Even when you're successful, you still got
yeah.
that
Well,
still
and
happens.
let's not forget, the cube is huge.
Oh, I know.
The cube,
Great moment when
they're
it came on
monsters.
screen and you're looking up
Yes.
at it. It was a great moment.
Great moment of when the movie first started and we are in Picard, where obviously he's dreaming and he's having the memory of being in his alcove and it's zooming out from his eye, no less. It's zooming out and we're on the interior of this massive, massive ship.
Yes.
They communicating
Oh,
that
that was.
scale
Oh, you're right.
is, yeah,
Yes, that was. There's the opening scene. That was
yeah,
amazing. Yeah,
yeah.
it was fantastic. Well, we're only 3 minutes away from doing a full hour
Well,
50. Should
yeah,
we just do
we're
it
gonna
for
shoot for it. So the next
the?
thing got to talk about real quick is when Lily confronts Picard in his
Mhm.
Moby Dick Ahab moment. We get
Yes.
such a great, you
Oh,
know, the line must be drawn here, this
yes,
far, no further.
yes,
That's
yes.
that's another heavily memed scene with Picard when he freaks out.
And I've never read
Um,
Moby Dick, but the line of if his chest was a cannon, he would have
he would have
shot his
shot his
heart
heart
upon
upon
him.
it. Yeah.
I was like, that's a great line. No wonder Moby Dick is a classic. I've never read it. So, and I love how,
I've never read it either. And that's what she says.
yeah,
Actually, I've never read it. And I was like,
yeah,
ah. And then Picard, so eloquently and succinctly explains what Moby Dick is all about.
yeah,
And, just that pursuit of vengeance and blinding yourself to everything else that's going on around you and all of your other spectacular losses just
right,
for this victory that's going to be small in comparison, which
right,
again kind of puts him in his place.
Yeah.
he realizes that he is Ahab in this
Yeah.
scenario, and he
Mhm.
then he comes back out on the bridge
He
and
destroyed
tells
himself and his
everybody.
ship.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nearly lost everything. He nearly had his own Ahab moment before he came to
Yeah.
his senses, and yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Well,
and last
Perry.
but not least, we got a minute left. We got to talk about Deanna Troy being spectacularly drunk at the bar, and then having 3 shots of tequila, and then passing out at the table. Great comedic scene. Marina
It was.
Sirtis again.
Yes.
Yeah, she's always
Yeah.
wanted to do comedy. There's plenty of interviews that she's given where she said she always wanted to do comedy and they never really let her, and then they
Uh,
finally let her, and she nails it.
yeah, she
Spot
did a
on,
great job,
spot on.
especially with Riker giving her a hard time.
Yeah,
Um, and she's like, I was the only one here and I had to get him talking. And
I had to
yeah.
keep his hands off me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it.
So
20 minutes to keep his hands off me. Yeah. Yeah. I, she and Riker need to finally get together. I know they eventually do, but for crying out loud, even now they
yeah,
still haven't quite got
okay.
together.
Well, it's coming. It's
I
coming.
know. I know it does. I know it does.
Well, okay, I think that will actually do it for us here on this Fire Caves After Dark special. We
Right.
did run the full length of the movie, and I still feel like there's a lot more we could talk about this movie. And as other things come up in Deep Space Nine, which we'll be returning to next week, we will, of course, make references. I'm sure. As always, guys, you can find us and follow us anywhere you happen to do your social medias. You can also listen to us anywhere you do podcast. I happen to do it on Spotify. So until next week, guys, where we return to our regular Deep Space Nine programming, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.